Brian Barnes is a Lancaster compliance officer, joined by Hannah Smith, new today. Welcome. Jay Woodruff, I think, is joining us by Zoom. I don't know whether Jay is there or not. Jay is with VRMC, Virginia Marine Resources Council. Glenn Rowe is handling the virtual internet connection today. Crystal Way is our stenographer. On the board today, we've got Will Tolles, Andy Ransom at the end, Hunter Sled beside me, and Bruce Julian on the other side. I'm Cecil Lowell. I want to remind you that this is an internet public meeting and is being accessed by other interested parties through a Zoom internet connection. Anyone present who wishes to comment on the audience above before the board can come forward when I call. State your name for the record. You will be heard. Also, if you're joining us by Zoom, notify Mr. Rowe. He will let us know, and you also will be heard. We have a full boat today, and we have applications to take action upon. But I think that Roger McKinney has a presentation he'd like to make to the board. I'd like to give Roger about 5 minutes to make that. I've got water here, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had occasion twice in the last couple of months to have a permitting situation where we have the need or the necessity to place part of the project through a vegetated wetland. And in one of the cases over in Middlesex County, they have an ordinance that allows us, in a situation where that encroachment can't be mitigated properly, then they have a fee that we can pay to the county, what they put in their emergency wetlands repair fee or whatever they want to call it, to allow us to encroach on or through a vegetated wetland, which is normally not allowed at all. So I have an occasion here in this county to propose a boat ramp that, because of its location and the topography that exists on the site, there's one place where where it's most appropriate, and there's probably, excuse me, 35 or 40 square feet of tidal wetlands that are involved. So when I got the letter from Brian that said that it must be mitigated, there was nowhere on the site to actually do a true mitigation. So I asked Brian if they had a proposal or something there that would allow us to compensate the county monetarily for the loss of vegetated wetlands that we were proposing. It was about 40 square feet. And at that time, he said that there was no provision within the Lancaster County Wetlands Ordinance to allow for that. So what I'm asking today is that you all would consider the possibility of allowing for a fee to be paid to the county. I know Brian has a, what do you call that fund, Brian, that you have to choose? Usually it's from fines and that sort of thing.
The Wetlands Board Fine Fund.
Fine fund, okay. Middlesex County, in their adoption of their ordinance, they have allowed for a fee of $9 a square foot. Over in Matthews County, it's $13 a square foot. And in Westmoreland County, it's $1 a square foot. So I would just ask that at some point in time, if you're having a work session or something, that you would consider the possibility of allowing a fee to be paid if it meets the criteria of this thing that I just received this morning, that you would allow us and the applicant to pay a fee to the county, which you could use for construction of wetlands somewhere else or doing some other repairs that may be on your agenda. So I would just ask that you would consider adopting that, and I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I'd be...
No, I thought the board would agree that we need to take it under consideration. And
Thank you,
very
thank
much.
you very much.
And before you move off this topic, Jay Woodward did have his hand raised. He wanted to make a comment.
He is on?
He is on. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and put him on, Glenn.
Okay. Hello, Jay. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I just kind of raising my hand to say I'm here, and stand by for any questions you may have. I just want to let you know I'm actually virtually present.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Let's begin with the 7 applications we need to take some action on. The first is Stanley Saunders. Someone representing Mr. Saunders, come forward. Please state your name for the record.
Yes, good morning. It's Roger McKinley, 691 Mill Point Drive in Heathville, Virginia, and I'm here this morning to represent Stanley or Sandy Saunders. What we're trying to do.
Excuse me,
Oh,
I
I'm
need to
sorry.
read the publication.
Gotcha.
This is the publication through the Rappahannock Record. Go ahead.
Stanley L. Saunders, care of Roger McKinley Sr., 691 Mill Point Drive, Heathville, Virginia, 22473, request permission to construct 147 linear feet of riprap revetment along the shoreline of Tabbs Creek, located off Virginia State Highway 645 on Edgewater Farm. Tax map number 35115G, VMRC number 20-1655.
Go ahead, sir.
Very good. What we're proposing to do, Mr. Saunders has an existing riprap revetment facing the Chesapeake Bay there on his property. And as you come around that spit, he's got another, well, a couple of 100 feet of shoreline there. Or am I not hitting it?
Yeah,
Okay.
You're a pretty loud talker, but
Okay.
make sure you're.
There's a lot of debris and flotsam that's come up into the existing marsh fringe that's there. And so what we're proposing to do is to clean up all that debris and then regrade the bank and place this riprap revetment landward of mean high water on a regraded bank on that portion of his property. He still owns more property over to the west, but that's what we're asking for this morning, and I'm willing to answer any questions you all may have.
Any questions, Mr. Barnes? Comments?
No, indeed. You guys saw the project on Tuesday, despite the rain and everything. You've seen the revision, of course, and I don't foresee. It looks like the revetment's aligned behind the wetland vegetation, and if you feel that it's a necessary project, it is aligned to minimize impact.
Jay Woodruff, any questions? Mr. Woodruff, are you on? Have we lost a connection?
Yes, I am.
Okay, wake up.
Well, I was taking notes, and I apologize for my delayed response.
No problem.
Did you have a question?
If a member of the public,
No.
there's one other person on.
If you have no questions, anyone in the public want to speak to that? Apparently not, there's not many people here. How about the board members? Any questions, comments?
I just have one question for Roger. Roger, on the cross-section, page 7.
I'll get it in a second. Yes, sir.
Maybe I'm missing a page, but I don't see any elevation data as to where the finished top of the revetment goes.
There should be a statement in the upper left-hand corner that gives you the height of the riprap and the base width. The riprap's 4 feet high and a 1.5 to 1 slope with a base width of 6 and a small buried toe.
But that 4 feet doesn't tell me where we end up as far as elevation.
I'm not sure I understand your question. I know I understand your question, but I'm not sure how it applies here. They're going to regrade the bank back, and I would assume that that's going to be probably 2/3 up the height of the new bank that's been created. The bank that's there now is probably 5 to 6 feet high.
Yep, I'm aware that, I just don't know how does the contractor know where to, the height of the riprap?
Well, once he clears to the base of the bank, then 4 feet up from the base of the bank, where it's been graded, that's gonna be the height of the riprap, and the base width would be 6.
I believe you're probably looking for height above mean high water.
That would be 4 feet.
Are you looking for the height of the ungraded?
I was just looking for the finished, what we're supposed to, what would be anticipated when we're done here? Since we don't know the elevation of mean high water, we got the mark on there. I was just curious about that. No further questions.
Okay, anyone else have any questions? Do I hear a motion to approve?
Move the project be approved as revised.
Second? Second. Have a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. 5-0, motion's approved.
Who was the second on that?
Huh?
Thank you.
The next one is David Newcomb. Roger, you represent him also?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay.
Ro-
Good.
David Newcomb, care of Roger McKinley, Senior, 691 Mill Point Drive, Heathsville, Virginia, 22473. Request permission to construct 200 linear feet of riprap revetment with associated bank grading and 3 proposed riprap groins 48 feet in length each along the shoreline of the western branch of the Coratoman River, located off Virginia State Highway 604 on Oak Hill Road, tax map 26J-3-2-3, VMRC number 20-2217.
Good morning, Roger McKinley, 691 Mill Point Drive in Heathsville, Virginia. Mr. Newcomb and the contractor are proposing to do a major regrade on this existing bank to be able, excuse me, for the owner to access the water. The property on the downstream side, which is adjacent to this, has already been done. So this will be exactly like what you see over there. If you look at page 5 and the cross-section, you'll see where the existing bank will be graded. Excuse me, the new slope will be on a 3-to-1 slope with the riprap revetment being 8 feet high with a 12-foot base and a 1.5-to-1 slope. A new base of the bank will be created once this regrading has been done. And this entire riprap revetment will be landward of mean high water, and there's no existing vegetation there.
Okay, excuse me, I can't talk this morning. Mr. Barnes, any questions?
No, you all saw the site on Tuesday. A couple of us got down and walked the base of the bank. The tide permitted that. All of us looked over the edge, looked at the site. The area, as you guys know, doesn't have a whole lot of sand action in it right now in that whole reach, and there are no other groins in the area. I know that was one of your concerns on the site. I will say the adjacent property owner, as I indicated on Tuesday, the adjacent property owner has concerns about the groins. Mr. Bergen.
Did you not receive a letter from him?
I just received an email saying I wish to speak on Tuesday, so,
Okay.
or on Thursday rather. So that individual is online right now with his hand raised. So
Yeah, we'll give him a
when you
chance.
open up the public hearing, I would make sure you hear from him.
Yeah, we'll give him a chance to talk. Mr. Woodruff, Jay, any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. Yes, sir, Mr., I think it is Bergens. If you're on, could you make a comment?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. So my name is Paul Bergen, and we currently are building a house at 767 Oak Hill Road, which is the adjacent downriver property to the Newcomb property. At this point, we don't have any concerns about the 200-foot of riprap that's being proposed, but I do have concerns about the 3 48-foot groins that are being proposed to be installed. In researching groins, and I have several quick articles that I would like to read. Currently, North Carolina has banned groins, and in North Carolina, the negative impact of the groin on a downdrift shoreline is well understood. When groins work as intended, sand moving from the beach in the so-called downdrift direction, which is my property, is trapped on the updrift side of the groin, causing a sand deficit and increasing erosion rates on the downdrift side. This well-documented and unquestioned impact is widely cited in the engineering and geologic literature. The United States Army Corps of Engineers Coastal Engineering Manual describes groins as probably the most misused and improperly designed of all coastal structures. Over the course of some time interval, the creation causes a positive increase in beach width updrift of the groin. Conservation of sand mass therefore produces erosion and a decrease in beach width on the downdrift side of the groin. So that's the North Carolina article. I also have an article from the Army Corps of Engineers Coastal Engineering Marine state from William and Mary. And just to cut to the chase, it says the basic here is that groins interrupt the sand transport system and can cause increased erosion downdrift, which is my property. The third article was an article published in the 7th National Congress of Civil Engineering. Again, to get to the quick chase here, a scheme of system of interacting groins is given in that a single groin, besides its positive influence on the shore, causes numerous side effects, mainly in the form of coastal erosion on the lee side of the structure. In the case of a group of joins, the above effect appears on the lee side of the whole system. And finally, I have an article from the Encyclopedia of Ocean Sciences dated 2001. And again, to cut to the chase, thus, if a groin is growing the topographic beach updrift, it must be causing downdrift beach loss. So our concern with the proposed groins is that if they work to intended correctly, the proposed site will gain sand and will gain beach, and the downdrift side of them will lose beach and possibly cause further erosion. Mostly on my current property, but it could cause further loss downriver on the Coratoman as well. We don't want to be forced into an avenue where we have to start installing more groins going downriver in the Coratoman to continue each property owner's current beach. The current beach on that side of the Coratoman River has a very natural flow, and everybody has about the same adequate amount of beach area. So at this point, my concern, and I'd like to voice, is that the 200 feet of riprap, I think very good, no problems there. I think that 3 groins installed in that area will affect my property drastically, as well as other further properties downriver from those 3 groins. So that's my proposal, and I appreciate your hearing my concern.
Thanks for your comment. Mr. McKinney, could you respond to that?
Yeah, would you ask him if his existing shoreline is hardened with riprap?
I forgot.
I don't think you have to ask him that. That shoreline is hardened, yeah.
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 Yeah, so in that case, I don't see where he's going to experience any shoreline erosion except for what's out in front of the rock. The rock is protecting his property. I've got several reports from the state of South Carolina where they have installed groins on a number of beaches there. And the main thing that we could do in this case is to fill the groin cells up to start with. I'm doing another project right now up on the Potomac River where we're going to do exactly that. much more volatile area up there than what we're experiencing here. But in the process of installing the riprap and regrading the bank, we can propose to fill the groin cells up so that whatever downdrift material, these would be low profile, they're underwater at high tide, so it allows for the littoral drift to carry what sand it's got further on downstream, and it prevents the robbing of material from downdrift properties. So if we stay with the groins, which I would like to do, then I can propose a modification where we would fill the groin cells up with sand, starting at the riprap and then creating something like a 15 or 20-to-1 slope on down towards the end of the groins. Probably half of it would be underwater at high tide, so that whatever's moving in the system can continue to move in the system. So that would be, if you will consider the installation of the groins, I would propose to do an amendment to this application to allow for beach nourishment, if you will, of the two groin cells.
Mr., forgot your name again.
Bergen.
Yes. Would that satisfy your problem?
To be honest with you, I would have to research that South Carolina information. Based on the information I have, no, it would not solve my problem. And I think that may be a temporary solution until that installed sand is washed away, and then we have a problem further down the road. So at this point, no, I'm not hearing or seeing any proof that the negative impact of the groins would not affect my property.
Okay. How about the board? Can someone offer some comments?
I just have a couple questions.
Okay.
Brian, could you refresh my memory again about this board's jurisdiction regarding groins and below mean low?
Right, your jurisdiction would end at mean low water, and the groin structure itself has to go out, as he stated, 48 feet from mean high. So much of the groin will not be in your jurisdiction. The beginning of the groin will, the upland portion of the groin going out will be. So it's a 1-2 punch. Once, if this were approved today, it still has to go on to VMRC for approval. My biggest concerns as staff with this request has nothing to do with the Wetlands Board jurisdiction, but with the upland modifications proposed. It's a huge amount of bank grading and a huge amount of Bay Act requirement that's going to be in for replanting and trees and shrubs and all that stuff. So that's kind of my main concern with this. I will read you guys real quick from the wetlands guidelines. The low profile groin is designed to resemble the natural beach slope and allow sand to bypass and thus nourish downstream properties once the groin has been filled. Groins which are too long for the existing beach may shunt sand out to deeper water, thus making it unavailable to downdrift properties. So generally, we expect that groins are going to, from a side profile, follow the existing beach profile, or in this case, both the adjacent property and this property are not what I would consider a quote-unquote beach. They are non-vegetated mud flats or wetland flats or mineral flats. They're not a classic beach per se. That being said, if the groin follows that profile and the end of the groin goes deep enough that it allows that sand to bypass, once the groin cells are filled, Mr. Bergen or the other neighbors should not experience any undue quote-unquote harm from sand being trapped updrift or downdrift. But generally, I will tell you guys, and this is the last thing I'll say, traditionally, as you guys know, our board has tabled projects if there's a protest, unless it's a protest that you can pretty quickly determine it's just sour grapes or something like that. If there's any kind of a technical merit at all to a protest, we've generally tabled the project to allow time for Mr. McKinley, Mr. Bergen to get together, the property owner, and that might also give staff a chance to make the property owner aware of the Bay Act implications that they might be in for with this project, and make sure if they even want to go that route.
Well, this board wants to work with everybody, including the neighbor, I don't know what the board thinks, but I would suggest that we either table this or until you can maybe work with the neighbor to come up with a plan and resubmit.
A couple more questions.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And I want to hear from Mr. Woodward too on the design here. I guess the only thing I see, Roger, regarding living shorelines is that one paragraph that you've got in here, given these circumstances. I noticed that there's no other groins that I can see, as far as I can see, up and down the shoreline. And the docks here, apparently it's way shallow, way out, because the docks are 150 feet long. So can you give me some of your technical thoughts on your consideration of living shoreline?
Yes, excuse me. In this case, since we're doing a major regrading, hopefully, and relocating mean high water, I might suggest at this time that we divide this project up into a riprap revetment project, and then subject to a revised statement, we will hold the groins in abeyance for a while until we're able to work out something with the next door neighbor and that sort of thing. There's no rush on our part, you know, to try to run this through. I can understand the concerns of the next door neighbor. As far as the living shoreline is concerned, with this regrading and access to the water, it just did not seem like an appropriate measure to take here given the new slope and given the way this bank has been eroding over the past. We just felt like the regrading and the installation of a hardened revetment at the base of the bank would make more sense than a living shoreline. However, if we proceed with the groins and we're able to help the next door neighbor to get some understanding and maybe ease his mind a little bit about the project, that's what I would suggest, that if we can proceed with the riprap revetment, 200 feet, I will submit a revision to Brian, just as I did on the Saunders application, that we hold off on dealing with the stone groins until further information is available and the adjacent property owner has had a chance to look at some information that I will send to him that I got on the South Carolina report. And I mean, we're talking about hundreds of groins to try to save the beaches down there. So that would be what I would like to offer to the board, is if we
Yeah,
could
that
consider the
sounds-
riprap.
That sounds like a reasonable solution to me.
The last question I've got for Roger.
Yes, sir.
The 3-to-1 slope, I'm on page 5 now.
Yes, sir.
That's approximately twice the distance cut back. Does your cost estimate include all that work? Your cost estimate include everything on these plans?
I don't think so.
There's, you know,
I hadn't gotten an estimate from the contractor, and he's gonna have to work with Brian, because it falls within the resource protection area, to see exactly what they're gonna have to replace as far as vegetation and trees. But my cost is just for the Armorstone revetment and the proposed groins.
and so, just so I got this right, so all the existing vegetation, pine trees, undergrowth, all of that gets stripped away?
That is correct, just like Mr. What's-his-name's property adjacent. Yeah, the same contractor did the job next door.
So why is it necessary to strip back 90 feet?
Well, to maintain a manageable slope, 4-to-1 would be better. 3-to-1 is acceptable, that you can take a riding lawnmower and maintain it. It's going to be a considerable distance back from where the edge of the riprap is. We're talking about 90 feet. So that is going to have to be seeded, and it's going to have to be maintained. And so anything less than that is going to create too steep a slope to try to maintain it. So that's why we're proposing that grade. It's the slope next to it, where our adjacent property owner is probably 2.5 to 1 or 3 to 1.
Okay. Jay Woodruff, would you like to add a comment to that?
Sure. First, I'll kind of reiterate what Brian had said, that, in all the years of doing this and all the years of playing on a beach, I thought I knew what a beach was. But recently, I've had VIMS correct me and say, well, no, that's a sandy, non-vegetated wetland, which means your jurisdiction would end at mean high water. It wouldn't go all the way up to the bank. That's kind of an aside. I think the path that you're moving forward on potentially to eliminate the groins would give us a little more time. And I understand, trust me, that this board and other boards have lots of concern about tree loss and bank grading in the buffer, but that's not your jurisdiction. That's not your reason for being here today. And it's hard to separate the two out. The only other thing I will mention is, with this additional time, we could ask Emily or VIMS to do a site visit and give us some input on, A, is it a beach? Is it a jurisdictional beach, or is it a jurisdictional non-vegetated sand flat? And B, what, any pointers, concerns she may have about groins. I will note, when I look at the aerial photo, for whatever reason, there is a real wide bar, Bruce mentioned it, offshore, shallow water bar, kind of a D-shape, whatever you want to call it. It's, so, his pier is going to have to be longer to reach deep water. That's the bad thing. The good thing is he's got good shallow water offshore, which could lend itself to accentuating a beach, if it is one, here and on the neighbors on both sides, and kind of taking advantage of the natural bathymetry topography of the area, or even a small breakwater or a large sill, or what Scott Hardaway is now calling a brill, a breakwater sill, if a beach is desired. But I would concur that perhaps withdrawing the groin portion now, if you believe you have jurisdiction over the revetment above high water, you can act on that now, and we can address the groins in the future. But Brian is also right. It would require a permit from VMRC. We do have a general permit if all criteria are met, and it will also require a permit from the Corps of Engineers for both portions.
Okay, thank you for your
Thank you.
comment.
I might mention that I have the permit from the Army Corps of Engineers that
Okay.
just came in this week for the whole project.
Yeah. Would you consider tabling until
I
you?
would consider tabling the
Until
groin
next-
portion, but I would like to go ahead and proceed with the riprap revetment, which is in fact landward of mean high water and was hopefully out of your jurisdiction.
I think you guys could do that, but my motion would sound something like, approve the riprap revetment, deny the request for 3
Simple.
groins. Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that until we see a complete project, this application is tabled.
Do you hear a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, 5-0, motion's carried. Thank you, Roger.
You're very welcome.
Excuse me, the next one is Reckel. Someone represent them, you, Roger?
That would be me, Roger McKinley, 691 Mill Point Drive, Heathville, Virginia.
Let's read the
Surely.
posting.
Eugene Rackle, care of Roger McKinley, Senior, 691 Mill Point Drive, Heathville, Virginia, 22473. Request permission to construct 155 feet linear feet of riprap revetment against the face of an existing bulkhead along the shoreline of the western branch of the Coratoman River located off Virginia State Highway 354 on Hills Lane, tax map 20B-1-2, VMRC number 20-2079.
Okay, go ahead, Mr.
Yes. In this case, the contractor and Mr. Rackle are proposing to install a riprap revetment up against a deteriorating, failing wooden bulkhead. And actually, I think it's vinyl. So this is something that we have done many, many times in the past. Normally, on a situation where you have mean high, mean low up against a bulkhead, Brian doesn't present it to you all. He lets it go through the system. I have the permit for this project from the Army Corps of Engineers. It is going to require a permit from Mr. Woodward because it encroaches over mean low water. So that's the gist of the project. I don't know how old that wall is, but it looks like it was very poorly constructed.
Yeah, it's,
Where we stop it at 0.5 on page 4, it looks like they've done some recent repairs to the remaining part of that wall. And so now at this point, he's just trying to, you either have to tear it all out and rebuild it. This is a simpler solution, is to place riprap revetment up against the failing wall.
Brian, any comments?
You guys saw the site on Tuesday. Although the weather was pretty bad, we still got a chance to walk down there and look. As you guys could see, the area of upland beside the bulkhead looks like it was, to me, side casted dredge material where this inlet was dredged out at some point in the past. That's probably why the dead men failed and the bulkhead slipped. Also, it's a vinyl wall, so it doesn't allow any hydrostatic pressure release. It's just trying to hold back that very poor soil. Of course, rainy time now, so you had a lot of wet ground there because it's, you know, weeping out of the base of that big bank above. So just a really bad situation all around. This one, as I told you guys on site, does present a bit of a management dilemma because this person does have the right to slide that bulkhead out and replace it in footprint without any kind of permit from us whatsoever. That being said, some of the area behind the bulkhead is now becoming wetlands again. So there's a little bit of a dilemma there. I think the consolation there is that this is going to have riprap in front of it. So eventually, as sea level rises, it's going to become almost like a sill, if you will. And the area behind it would become basically tidal marsh with a sill in front of it. This one's a tough one. It certainly needed a permit. Roger's right. Normally, if you have good hard upland and the tide rises and falls against the face of a bulkhead, I'm going to say no permit required for that activity. But in this case, there's intertidal activity. The bulkhead was deteriorated enough that there's tide behind the bulkhead too. So it's definitely in your jurisdiction, in my opinion, and needs a permit from you. The riprap in front of the bulkhead eventually kind of naturalizing the bulkhead is probably a better way to go, given that this is likely a man-made feature anyway.
Okay, Jay Woodard?
Yes, thank you. Again, concur with Brian. It looks to be man-made from both the aerial photographs and being on site. We don't have any documentation of it. It was likely years ago. Ergo, the submerged lands within that basin are technically not owned by the Commonwealth of Virginia. They would be Mr. Rackles or somebody's private land that's submerged now. So it's not going, I'm going to change my review and make it a no permit required from us. Again, Brian's comment that, we're seeing more and more of these, especially down around Norfolk and areas like that where old bulkheads that were built back in the 20s and 30s, it's just low. So now what happens is you get vegetated wetlands behind them, and what you get is what is often referred to as a perched wetland. It's a wetland area, and it may not be contiguous with mean low water, but it's contiguous with high water, and they are jurisdictional wetlands. So the proposal to me, I again agree with Brian, maybe I'll just say ditto. It'll likely end up with a tidal wetland fringe in behind that bulkhead once that bulkhead is more stabilized, so it doesn't collapse and fill in the basin. I don't know what that basin is used for. It's not a boat basin. Maybe it was at one time, but that's, I guess, my long-winded comment.
Okay. Anyone in the public? Apparently not. I'm sorry?
No, nobody's hand is
Nobody?
raised.
No internet? Open up to the board. Comments? Questions?
Roger, you got any knowledge on the history of that feature? That square, was that a dredge channel?
We used to have a contractor around here, whose name I won't mention, but throughout Karatum and by the bay and a lot of those subdivisions that were created up there on the Karatuman, if there was a soft spot in the ground, they would dredge it out and then encirculate it with a bulkhead. And I'm not sure who did this one, but it's been there for a long, long time. And as Jay said, it was probably an upland at one point in time, which would remove his jurisdictional authority there. I really don't know the answer to your question on who or when that was done, but it was pretty standard fare throughout the counties. Indian Creek Yacht and Country Club, a lot of dredge channels in there, several over in Northumberland County by me. So it was just something that at that time didn't require a permit, or was just kind of overlooked, and it facilitated developers being able to create a lot or two or more along the area that was dredged out, because now it's navigable water. So, but anyway, he needs to do something there.
Yeah, did this landowner put in the vinyl sheet pile?
He did, about 15 years ago.
Okay, so was consideration given to just repairing the,
He said he'd rather not go through that routine again because of the softness of that spoil material that's behind the bulkhead. I'm not sure how you would tie a new wall back to make sure that it stayed there. You might have to go all the way back up until you hit some solid upland and connect a bunch of 5/8 galvanized rods together to get out there. But I think this is the simplest solution anyway.
All right.
okay.
You good?
Do you have a statement in here regarding living shoreline treatment?
I probably don't, because I looked at it and thought, well, it's pretty self-explanatory.
Well, it is, but we need to.
I can certainly furnish
We
it.
need to dispense with, we don't have a fetch issue here. It looks like over time, Brian, that this is just gonna turn back to that little cove will turn back to a natural wetland
I think so.
without any treatment.
Well, you can do that, but I think it's his prerogative, his money.
Well, the code says statements required in the permit application regarding the living shoreline will not work.
I'll
Yeah,
furnish.
I think since Mr. McKinley thought this would be a no permit required, he did not furnish that. Given the time constraints, staff went ahead and advertised it to get it in the process, and that's something that slipped through the cracks. You may be able to approve it contingent upon the applicant showing staff a living shoreline statement before permit issued, sometime in the next 10 days. Is that okay?
Jay, do you have any comment on that?
Yes, I do. Well, I have a general comment. Back in 2001, 1198. The Wetlands Board in Lancaster approved 135 feet of riprap revetment at the existing bulkhead, kind of on the upriver side. Unfortunately, I can't share this screen with you, but so Mr. Rackle did apply back in '01 and got a permit to put riprap at least along a portion of the wall as it comes into the cove, not all the way at the head of the cove, but those drawings show an existing bulkhead with proposed riprap that our records indicate he got a permit for, if that helps any. But, I can't find a record of the actual bulkhead being applied for or approved. And I'm sorry, I kind of missed your question because I was looking through these drawings.
Well, we were talking about the code requirement now for living shoreline consideration. And I guess so,
correct.
since you say there's no permit required, that
No.
would be a moot point?
No, your point initially was exactly right. Part of what is considered a complete application anymore with any project is, did you consider a living shoreline? And if it needs a permit, then it needs one. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But yeah, we are, I and others have been talking with management about redoing the application because it's been long overdue and we need to get some living shoreline teeth into the application. But yes, a statement as to why a living shoreline is not being considered needs to be included in what we would consider to be a complete application.
But in the case where no permit's required, that wouldn't be appropriate.
Well, it depends on who no permit is required from.
You.
Yeah, but if it's a wetlands project, it needs a permit from you or the Corps of Engineers. It's still a project that needs, I don't need a statement when a guy's building a pier. But when there's a shoreline stabilization project proposed, we want to know, was a living shoreline considered? And if so, why aren't you doing it?
Okay.
Regardless of whose jurisdiction there is.
Okay, that's.
If it's
You've
a
answered my
shoreline
question.
stabilization project.
You've answered my question.
I'd be glad to furnish that to Brian. And as I stated earlier, when we looked at this initially, based on my 25 years of experience, a case like this, we've always gotten a no permit needed letter. And it seemed quite obvious here that doing sand fill and rock out in the middle of the channel and all that just did not seem appropriate. I'd be glad to explain that in a statement, but it just seemed moot to me at the point. And at that time that I submitted this back in November, I was working under the assumption that no agency would require a permit. I know VMRC would not hold jurisdiction over the area. I have the Army Corps permit for the project, and normally the county's experience has been no permit required for riprap up against a bulkhead. We just did one exactly like this down on Carter's Creek. And so anyway, that's why there's no statement in there, but I'll have one in his hands by this afternoon.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Move the project be approved with the statement included concerning why the living shoreline wasn't considered.
You hear a second?
I second.
All in favor? Raise your right hand. 5-0, the motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Roger. The next one is Daniel, I can't pronounce that.
Hello?
Cheryl. Who's representing that? Roger?
That's me.
Excuse me, go ahead and read the.
Daniel Shavayo Jr., care of Roger McKinley, Seniors, 691 Mill Point Drive, Heathsville, Virginia, 22473. Request permission to construct 100 linear foot riprap revetment and 1 50-foot linear foot breakwater along the shoreline of the Chesapeake Bay, located off Virginia State Highway 695 on Windfall Lane, tax map number 41-1G, VMRC permit number is 20-2092.
Go ahead, Rod.
This piece of property, when I first went down there to look at it, I was just amazed. He had lost like 15 feet of property in one event. Years ago, when this property was developed down there, there were gap breakwaters installed way offshore, which you can see. It's probably 11 or 12 of them. But unfortunately, there's a flaw in their design. And the structures are awesome. They've got an 18-foot base, but the problem is that the gaps are too big, too long, and needs to be shortened up. So over the period of years, these homeowners there, and I have a permit in process for the next door neighbor as well to do something similar. So the homeowners have gone in and they've constructed their own inside breakwaters, inside the ones that were already built. And that still hasn't solved the problem. So in this case, we're going to propose to do a revetment up against the eroding bank, even though it's above mean high water. And we're going to propose to do another 50-foot breakwater that, depending on the tide you're there, I've been there where there's no water there at all, as is the case when I was there when I did this. So the next door neighbor is having a similar problem. And so we're proposing to do next door the same thing, only shorter, and another breakwater that would tie into this breakwater. And that's going to bridge the gap that exists with the large offshore breakwaters that is allowing, on a northeast fetch, it's just beating that piece of shoreline to death. So that's what we'd like to do. Dan has told me that he'd much rather spend money on something other than rock, but he seems to have his share there.
Right. Mr. Barnes?
Yes, you guys looked at the site on Tuesday, and we discussed the issues with, since it's a two-part project, one is the backshore revetment, the other is what I call a gap breakwater. Although there's one gap breakwater there, it looks like they need a gap in the gap. But the breakwater, of course, is not a very big issue. Even though some of that is in your jurisdiction, a lot of breakwaters are well offshore, some are not. This one does require a bit of your permit. The backshore revetment definitely would require a Wetlands Board permit, but as I told you on site, I don't think that it is consistent with the coastal primary sand dunes and beaches guidelines for alterations of sand dune.
And by definition, that is sand dune.
Yes, that is a sand dune. I know we talked earlier about a site that is a beach, but it's not actually a beach. This is actually a sand dune based on the vegetation that's present on the feature and based on the slope of the front slope and the back slope and the height of the feature. I think it would be a slippery slope to begin to permit riprap revetments on an eroded scarp in front of that sand dune. It is regrettable that that was lost in a storm and that the gentleman's property the house is right behind that area. But I think if you have a properly designed gap breakwater and you do the proper beach nourishment, I think eventually that sand dune would heal itself, and I think he'd be returned back to kind of a good state with good protection. But I just don't see that it's consistent with the guidelines for us to approve that kind of an alteration to a sand dune.
Also, I believe that the county has an ordinance against encroachment upon
Yes.
sand dunes.
Yes, we've adopted the Beaches and Dunes Act into ordinance, and that's in good effect and in full force.
Right. Mr. Wooders?
Yes, it should be a beaches and dunes permit, not a wetland permit, but, your board's jurisdiction nonetheless. There are differences within the ordinance, and I concur that, the guidelines would say put the stone behind the jurisdictional beach. And in Virginia, from a definition standpoint, a dune is a beach and a beach is a dune. They're interchangeable. And the beach would go from mean low water to the back of a dune if there is a dune. And if there isn't a dune, to the foot of a scarp that changes the topography. So, the only thing that could really be done here would be to move it back behind that current scarp, which would be out of your jurisdiction, and you would be permitting the portion of the breakwater that is within your jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you. Anyone in the public, how about our internet connection? Comments?
Anybody with their hand raised?
Anybody on?
Okay.
Okay. Board comments?
A couple questions for Roger.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned adjacent neighbor, I guess, to the north.
Yes.
You're working on that. I guess with these projects, you would anticipate being done simultaneously?
Absolutely.
Did it?
It seems like it'd be prudent that we look at both of these applications simultaneously. I guess as we stood there Tuesday, Roger, looking at that standing there looking at that guy's house, I'd be a little nervous.
Yeah.
I'm looking directly northeast with that big gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
On those far breakwaters.
Yes, sir.
And seeing that totally, how far are those things apart? Quite
Couple 100 feet.
and seeing this big hole
Mm-hmm.
where nor'easters come blowing in there, and wondering if your proposed breakwater were to continue on south, I guess, south towards that built-up sand area, would that be able to knock that wave energy down?
Well, that's certainly what we're hoping for with this project as well as the one next door.
I mean, to go farther than what you've got designed. Extend that another,
Yeah, he's got, that tombola that's built
Yeah.
there on the landward side of
Yeah.
that existing breakwater. That smaller breakwater, he built that. And so what we could do is.
I'm on page 4.
Okay, yeah, what he could do is to extend the proposed breakwater further to the south, as you mentioned. Let me see if I can get page 4 here. Because he's got a good beach behind the close-in breakwater that he had constructed some years ago, as well as the next-door neighbor.
Well, your mean low line's following that
Exactly.
built-up area there?
Exactly.
And
And
what-
it's the same way on the other side, where you have that scallop that comes back in there. So what we're gonna do is to try to tie these two breakwaters together. Now, the one on the next door neighbor, it extends all the way to an alignment with the end of the breakwater that's there.
We looked at that.
So this one, I wouldn't have to extend it very much further. I mean, if we've got an issue with the proposed revetment, then we could extend this breakwater, say another 10 or 15 feet to actually go past the end of the other one that's out there. And that might solve the problem.
Well, that would push any of those nor'easterlies into that existing bar.
That is correct.
Built up. That's
Yeah.
just what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That I would be a little nervous with that big blowout of that dune, and it's only about 10 feet, and she's gonna bust through.
Yeah. So that's certainly something that we can consider. We just had a case like this. What was that project? The Van Meers, or was it? Van Tynes, where we had a similar situation, where we had an existing humongous breakwater. And they had proposed to do another one, but that proposal was denied. And what we asked for was to put a small stone revetment around the eroding scarp, which your board approved after lengthy discussion. What we're trying to do is to make sure that by placing the riprap up against the eroding scarp, that if the proposed breakwater is overridden with a storm surge, that we don't lose even more of this beach and sand dune as it's marching towards his house. So I would love for you to consider the revetment. I think it's going to make him feel a lot more comfortable to know that if the breakwaters comes over the top of those, that he still has an area of protection for his property. I know I would feel more comfortable if I had that there. And the Van Tynes, it's worked out awesome. To have built a sill, because of the elevation difference, to have built a sill, it would have had to have been humongous to protect the sand dune and the eroding scarp that was there. This is very similar to that, where we're concerned that during a storm event, with being on Chesapeake Bay, exposed to the east and the northeast, well, you see the evidence of what happened at the last storm. And I think he and the contractor are trying as best they can to avoid that same scenario happening again. So without that riprap there on the edge of that scarp, then it's just going to happen again and again and again. I just don't know that filling it in with sand behind the breakwater, and it washed out. It was an upland that washed out before. It wasn't just sand that was placed there. It was an upland that had roots and trees and all that stuff. That's all gone. So I'm not sure that any amount of stone that's placed out there on the Chesapeake Bay is going to stop the march. Normally sand dunes historically move from east to west. That's just a natural progression. But in this case, east to west involves a house. And right next door, there's a mass drain field over there that several of these projects are dependent on, for their existence. So anyway, I would really love for you to consider that. We've got a road that goes over the hill that we used the last time we placed the rock on the existing revetment that's there. So there's no more disturbance to the area than what has already taken place. And I just know that the homeowner, Dan, I see him at the gym all the time, and he's concerned because his house is so close. So
Yeah, I don't blame him for being concerned. Most people would not have built a home there because of those concerns. The difference between the Van Tyne decision and this one is simply, as Jay stated earlier, Van Tyne was a beach. They proposed to build up against the scarp and behind the scarp. This is a dune where you have to build behind the dune. I think if this board were to approve the revetment portion, Mr. Woodward might have that decision reversed by the commission anyway. Given the way that the commission kind of operates now, I would certainly bet that would happen. The other statement about the concern with the breakwater and all, I think I agree. We saw that on site. The alignment when you face on Mr. McKinley, your north end of the proposed gap breakwater goes much further behind the shadow of the other breakwater than this one does. Mm-hmm. If you made the two match in a revised drawing, I think your coverage would be better. And I think this board's telling you that instead of they probably really legally can't approve one part of this project, but in return they might consider you expanding the reach of the proposed breakwater.
I'd like one more question to Roger. Roger, on page 5, you've got the height of the proposed breakwater at 5 feet. And that's 5 feet from where? Total?
yeah, that's from
Total height.
Yeah, from the existing grade.
I guess I'd also like to address Brian a little bit. The comprehensive plan talks about us trying to do things holistically across landowners and not doing these things piecemeal. And Roger, you indicated you're already working, thank goodness, with the adjacent landowner to the north.
Yes.
And since the project's going to be both simultaneously installed,
Mm-hmm.
would it not be prudent to come back to us with two applications for complete consideration? Mr. Barnes, would you entertain that notion?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have always, as I told you guys on Site Tuesday with the Nix and Ryan projects, we've always encouraged cooperation. In fact, that's even mentioned in the comprehensive plan explicitly, that the county will favorably consider shoreline property owners working together and treating a whole reach of shoreline the same instead of 100 foot of bulkhead, 100 foot of riprap, 100 foot of nothing, et cetera.
Have you received the new application?
I did. I think it came in the email yesterday or today. Yeah. The other thing I want to say really quick too, because you mentioned the drain field. Some of you were on the board then, some of you were not. The drain field was proposed to be a riprap revetment a couple years ago because some of the drain lines were actually exposed by mean high water. We denied that as well, or we were beginning to. I think the board had tabled it once, and we were beginning to deny that as well, because at that point, VIMS had weighed in, and a few other agencies said, hey, whoa, you can't approve a riprap revetment in this location. And that's when the homeowners association, if I'm not mistaken, or perhaps the owner of that individual drain field, I can't remember which, actually went to the Virginia Department of Health and got a emergency letter from the Virginia Department of Health. And in the code book, it does allow for an exemption due to a health emergency. And that is how that area got revetted with riprap. There's another area that another little drain field got revetted about a year and a half, 2 years ago without that health emergency. That was a violation. We began to process that as a violation, and they got an after the fact letter from VDH on that. So that's why those areas have riprap there, is because there are drain lines actually within 10 feet of that riprap, there's sewage lines.
Yeah. Okay,
I'll make a motion that we table action on this particular permit. Roger's indicated some opportunities with the neighbor, and then we delay, just table this action until we can look at the whole project together.
you having a meeting in March?
Yes,
Good.
March,
That's fine with me.
March 11th.
If we can
I'll
get it
second that.
on the next month's agenda, that would be fine. Been moved and seconded. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion's carried. Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
The next one is Mason Williams. Who is representing Mason Williams?
Joseph Scott, P.O. Box 315, Kilmarnock, Virginia 22482.
Thank you. Will you read the,
Mason Williams, care of Joseph Scott, P.O. Box 315, Kilmarnock, Virginia 22482, requests permission to construct 165 and 175 linear feet of stone sill and associated nourishment and plantings, and 148 linear feet of riprap revetment along the shoreline of the western branch of the Cortoman River, located off Virginia State Highway 611 and Woodbrook Road, tax map number 20-166, VMRC permit number 210032.
okay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so this is a peninsula, almost an island, where the property owner has riprap across the southern facing portion of the property. He wants to extend that another 30 feet, or 38 feet. You guys saw that when you're on the site there, where that piece of upland's getting washed out, and then come around that point there on the backside about 100 feet more of riprap. And the reason, originally we talked about potentially putting a sill out there and making that portion of it a living shoreline as well. However, the bank is in pretty bad shape there. It's about 3 or 4 feet tall, and it's undercut a couple of feet because of those pine trees that are there. So he's hoping to be able to place a revetment against that portion of it, because there is a guest house right there within 30 feet, maybe less. And then switch back to a sill as you head north on the inside there. let's see, 165 feet of sill with the appropriate sand and plantings behind it. And of course, along the shoreline there, he'll probably have to limb up and cut a lot of that undercut stuff back to get some sunlight in there to those particular ones. He'd really like to have a revetment all the way across there, but we're trying to comply with the new regulations as best we can, and I believe that portion can definitely be a living shoreline. And then on the point to the west, yes, where you're coming out of the main thoroughfare there, or the waterway, we propose to put rock in front of that particular fringe marsh that is there because it's getting washed away pretty badly, and it's going to taper into a revetment at the bank and leave an opening there where he's currently using that as a low spot to launch kayaks and boats. So, do you have any questions for me? I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Barner.
Didn't need a living shoreline statement because the application incorporated living shorelines techniques as required in the new code language. We looked at the site on Tuesday, and it looks like it's following all the guidelines, and there is a bit of revetment proposed, but county staff feel that the applicant has proven that those are necessary features, and they've incorporated living shorelines techniques where they are able to do that.
Okay. Jay Woodard.
I would agree that while there are some components of the project that are not classic living shoreline, the living shoreline design was incorporated to the extent practicable, at least according to the applicant and agent, and therefore it meets the intent of the law.
Okay, anyone in public? How about the internet connection? Anyone? Glenn?
Anything online? Okay.
Nothing? Okay. Excuse me. Anyone on the board want to make a comment? No comment? Could I hear a motion approved? Could I hear a motion to approve?
Also move.
Second?
Second.
Moved and second. All in favor, raise your right hand. 5-0. Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have the next two, I think, are properties adjacent to each other. It's Nix and Ryan. Joey, I think this is your project. Could you come
Yes, for
forward? state your
Catherine
name?
Nix, Joseph Scott, P.O. Box 315, Kilmark, Virginia 22482.
I'm
Catherine?
wondering whether we should take two at a time or
I think you have to,
one each.
I might be speaking out of order, but I think you have to hear them separate.
Yeah, you do, yeah. It has to be two separate hearings, one right after another, just to be,
Okay,
I know it makes, he could have put them together, but,
yeah,
But-
well, that's no problem.
Just a point of information, do you guys actually allow that, multiple
yes.
permits across multiple tax
Yes.
map parcels? Okay.
They
and then-
would be co-applicants, but you could do that,
Okay,
especially if they're connected and contiguous.
okay.
You
That's
can't
good to
have
know.
them skip, but if it's one connected and contiguous stretch of shoreline, you
Okay.
could do one project
A
one
a lot
time.
of counties.
I thought that was being done separate because of the property owner's desires.
Well, it moved forward that way, but
Okay.
I was just asking for my,
Okay.
point of information, because in Middlesex County, you can't do that. They have to be, everybody can be working together, it can all come through at the same time.
Now,
It has
you
to be
guys
separate.
could discuss these two at the same time, and then you as chairman could ask for, do I hear a motion on the Mason Williams project? Okay, and then do that vote, and then you could, or a Nix, and then the next one you just have to take two separate votes. You could discuss them together, if you so desire.
All right, let's do Catherine Nix first.
I would read that, and since we started the hearing, but I guess the only downside, potential downside is if you had an objection to, if you had two or three and a person was objecting to one.
What,
That would be a downside of trying to group them.
correct, yeah.
I'll probably always do them separate, so.
Okay. Well, we like to give Crystal as much minute time as possible.
Like, be quiet, please.
Catherine Nix, care of Joseph Scott, P.O. Box 315, Kilmarnock, Virginia, 22482. Request permission to construct 170 linear feet of riprap revetment along the shoreline of the western branch of the Cortoman River, located off Virginia State Highway 624 on the Cortoman Drive. Tax map 20D-4, 3A and 4A, VMRC number 210110.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Scott.
Yes, staff knows more about the history of this project than I do. Evidently, it's something that's been in the hopper for a while, and there's not always been an agreement amongst various property owners, and then, of course, who owns what down there. But the portion that is being done for Mrs. Nix, as well as Mr. Ryan, at the base of the shoreline, they actually own that shore. So the bank, you guys have been down there, it's pretty evident what's happened to the bank. Trees have been falling off because the soil is sloughing off, and a lot of the soil issue really is coming more from the streams coming out of the bank for the fact that it's been raining nonstop since August. And I think that's caused a lot of soil failure, which has caused the loss of trees, and it's made this particular area a lot worse, a lot more quickly over about the last 6 months. So what the contractor would like to do when he does the project at the end of the road there, I forget the name, but they're working on that one as well. They're going to actually be doing grading there, so they hope to be able to do all three of these at the same time. They'll grade that one, create a pathway down to where they can get the stone to the bottom, and then put stone up against the base of the bank all along this one, as well as Mr. Ryan's too. And in hopes that to stabilize the base and some of the water that's coming out of the bank, there's no plans at this time to do any grading on this site. A lot of different things play into that factor, but you wouldn't be able to get so much of a slope given the proximity of the road. So they're hoping that the revetment at the base of the bank will actually serve more to cap off the issues that happen at the base of the bank, as well as stabilize or provide some sort of stabilization as everything kind of continues to fall down the bank in that particular area. A living shoreline will not address any of these problems. It would just be something offshore that would end up getting covered up by all the stuff that falls off the bank once it's finished doing what it's doing. But I think their approach of doing this is one that's within their ability to, it's cost efficient for their needs, so.
Okay.
If you have any questions.
Staff, Mr. Barnes?
Yes, on page 8, you do have his living shoreline statement. And I think after looking at the site on Tuesday, if you could see through the rain blowing sideways in your eyes, the road is very close to the edge, and the revetment is really kind of almost at the last possible minute to save access to these properties. So certainly necessary. It's facing north. It's not an area where a living shoreline would work. And I think this proposal, being that it's going to try to keep the bank intact, is the minimum necessary to achieve the result desired.
Okay. VMRC, Jay?
We have no jurisdiction. It's all above mean low water. Looks like the stone's going to be held landward of what little vegetation there is there. No other comment.
Is that it? Anyone in public? Apparently not. How about the internet connection? Any comments? Okay. Open up to the board. Comments? No comments? I hear a motion to approve.
Move that the Nix project be approved as presented.
Second.
I'll second.
Been approved and second. All in favor, raise your right hand. 5-0, motion's carried. The next one is Warren Ryan.
Yes, Joseph Scott, P.O. Box 315, Kilmarnock, Virginia 22482.
Okay, we need to read the posting.
Warren Ryan, care of Joseph Scott, P.O. Box 315, Kilmarnock, Virginia, request permission to construct 140 linear feet of riprap revetment along the shoreline of the western branch of the Cortoman River, located off State Highway 624 on Cortoman Drive, tax map number 20D-4-5A and 6A. DMRC permit number 21-0111.
Go ahead, Mr. Scott.
Crystal, you can just copy and paste everything I just said on the last one.
That works.
Essentially, it's the same thing. Same issues. Mr. Ryan does have a little bit more vegetation that has not been lost yet, so that's a good thing. But he also has a drain pipe that runs out of that side there, but that is going to be dealt with as well to keep that from washing down. Hopefully, we can make a continuous area of rock where it's going to come out of the drain pipe right down to the revetment and right on off. So that's really the only difference.
Staff, Mr. Barnes? Any other
The minutes
comments?
could just refer to my Nick's comments for the previous project. They're the same on this.
Mr. Woodruff, any further comments on these two projects, or this last project, Ryan?
Again, no jurisdiction, above mean low water, keeping the rock behind the grass.
Public? No one? How about no one in internet connection, Mr. Rowe? Open up to the board. Any further questions for this project? If not, we hear a motion.
I just got a comment for Joey, and also a question.
Okay.
I like your comment there regarding the living shoreline. I would like it to be definitive, though, may not, but either will or it won't, in your opinion, in the future. We know how these things are definitive. Also, where your access to the site, I'm on page 17, where possible and as needed is not too definitive. So in the future, I'd appreciate that. And I also want to ask your professional opinion. As Brian stated, this is a last-minute ditch effort to try to save access to these properties. And with the limited amount of treatment here that's presented, I guess I'm looking, Brian, at you to, do you think natural succession and vegetation is going to get this eroding bank under control before the road goes? Joey, what do you think?
It depends. It's always the answer. In terms of that, I mean, I think it's what the contractor has proposed to try to be somewhat of an effort to help maintain it. The contractors, and I'm speaking for someone else, which I hate to do, but in our conversations with the contractor, he essentially believes that he's not as concerned with that it will all slough down and they'll lose the road just because of the type of soil that's in the bank. But I think there'll be a continual process, over time where that could potentially happen if there's not something at the bottom to essentially catch it, so to speak. And that's where he's coming from with his idea of putting the revetment down there, is that once it sloughs, it'll kind of just, as we've said several times, and it's very unscientific, but the bank will grade itself because there'll be something at the base to kind of hold the foundation of it as it slides down the hill. Yeah, I mean, it could be graded, but even if you grade it, and this is just my opinion, but I believe if you grade something like this, you got a couple of problems. The first one is the soil that's in the bank and getting something to grow on it. Sometimes I've seen situations where they would grade something like this. You're not going to be able to get the slope that you need to kind of have a decent maintainable stabilization, not a ride a lawnmower down it, maintainable, but just to have something grow on it. And I've seen situations where they've come in and they've graded that and it'll be better when we're done, and it's actually worse because they can never get any established vegetation on it. So I think this is kind of Miss Nick's property, which has already been approved, but it would be more likely to, I believe, at some point she may have to try to do some sort of vegetation on that hill, or at least some sort of matting, but I don't know, short of doing a major project where you would completely take everything off, which I believe was proposed. Well, it wasn't proposed in the past, but it was brought to the county and it never did come to fruition in terms of a JPA and a WQIA and all the RPA modifications. That would be a huge undertaking, and there's no guarantee. I mean, we're just trying to play with what we got there in terms of leaving the vegetation that's there. And like I said, Miss Nick's property is a little worse because it has lost more vegetation, but sometimes these things come back without messing with them, so.
Yeah,
But it's a very clay-based.
I'm not suggesting bank grading at all. I just, some of that area is totally devoid of vegetation, and
Right.
I guess the recent chainsawing of numerous trees out there probably will not help.
That was before I got involved. So they were falling down, and I was told that they had spoken to the county about their removal, and I said, that's okay. So, which at the top of that hill, just for the record, at the top of that hill, there is a section that I can't delineate it because I'm not a surveyor. At the top of that hill, where the road is, there is a section that's actually owned by Caretone by the Bay. The homeowners association actually owns that portion of the road within a certain amount of feet. I have no clue where those lines are, but from what I found on site, essentially at the very top of that hill is where Mrs. Nix and Mr. Ryan own. And then from the flat area from the hill onto the road, there's I forget how wide it is, but it's owned by the Caretone by the Bay. So that was part of the issue as well between the homeowners association and the applicants, whom, like I said, I don't know the intricacies of the discussions that they had, but I know that was a pretentious point because who owns what and who's allowed to do what where. So, and as far as speaking definitively, I'm cautioned to do that in any of these applications because they say, best scientific. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an environmental scientist or an engineer, so just a permit getter.
Okay, any further comments from the board? Hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Been so moved, second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried.
Thanks.
That concludes the permit applications. I'd like to ask for approval of the minutes for December the 10th. Do I hear a motion?
Move that the minutes be approved.
A second?
Second.
Moved and second. Raise your hand, right hand. Motion's carried. There's also the issue of approval of the annual report. The annual report was submitted, and I've read it. I guess all the other board members have read it. Do you need to expand on that?
Yes, you guys have the annual report before you. We do this every year. We often do it in January. We did not have a January meeting this year, so Hannah got to kind of help with this and go over last year's activity. You have the summaries down there, 39 projects you heard, 6,610 linear feet of project, and a total cost of $2.4 million. That's one of the bigger years we've had in my time here in 12 and a half years. Lots of work. I appreciate everything you guys have done, all the rainy days and snowy days and hot days of looking at sites and making the hard decisions. I appreciate it. And a lot of folks don't realize that this only represents what you actually had to hear. We reviewed probably 10, 15, 20 more projects than this that did not require a permit or that otherwise meet Group 2 living shoreline criteria, breakwater projects, et cetera, that don't have to come to us anymore. And of course, that doesn't even touch the piers. And there's probably 50 or 60 other projects that were just private piers. So, yeah, generally you would make a motion to approve that. And once that's done, I will forward that on to the Chief of Habitat Management for VMRC, maybe sometime next week. And then VMRC will have this report.
Could I hear a motion to approve the annual report?
Also move.
So moved, second?
Second.
You have moved and second. Everyone agrees, raise your right hand.
Hey, Jay, are you still on there?
Yes, I am.
Jay, do you anticipate, we talked about this, I think, a year ago, Brian, that as living shorelines and these areas of treatment, particularly with some of the ones that Joey presented today, in my opinion, I think we're shorting ourselves by only adding up the linear feet of revetment or the linear feet of property line and not capturing the total benefits and the total area that we're actually treating. So do you anticipate VMRC wanting additional information as they track the implementation of living shorelines in our reporting system?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I've argued all along to management that 100 linear feet of living shoreline may in fact be 500 square feet of living shoreline, or 1,000, depending on the width of the living shoreline that you're getting behind the structure. I believe it needs to be measured in square feet and not linear feet. I don't know that we're currently not tracking that in our database per se. When we have a field, it goes down as 100 feet of riprap or 100 feet of sill or however many feet of breakwater. But again, another example, if you have 2 breakwaters that cover an area, let's say the breakwaters are each 50 feet long with a 25-foot gap in between, that would go down as 100 feet of breakwater on our database. You're treating 125 plus a little on either end of shoreline, and if you're getting an 8 to 10 foot wide beach behind the breakwater and planting that area of the upper beach, I agree. I think you are shorting yourselves. I think that the living shoreline data is being under-reported because of the units we're using, the units of measure we're using.
Do you see a change in that?
I don't know. We are, as I sent you that email, we are currently revising the wetlands guidelines, which is probably the first step at incorporating so much of this living shoreline thrust. And, those guidelines are going to go out to the boards as well as to the public for comment. We used to have the Habitat Management Advisory Committee. It would be a subset of folks, contractors, agents, board members, staff, and that's who would work on those types of documents, guidance documents, so we would get the most robust kind of report. I have not seen the latest revisions that are proposed. Randy Owen has been working on those. My understanding is the draft will be sent out to the boards for review, and that would be the perfect appropriate time to make those kinds of comments. I just, I don't want to sound like I'm, I say this kind of thing internally all the time. I don't know that it gets the attention that it would get if it was a comment coming externally.
Yeah, okay.
From either boards or contractors. You got Joey there, you got Roger. We're all learning this at the same time, and if we all get together, we can get a better product out of it. What I believe will probably happen, unfortunately, because it's the way of the world, is we will have revised guidelines. And a year after those guidelines are revised, somebody's going to say, well, we should have included this, and why didn't we think about that? Well, you can't predict the future, but you can certainly try to think about it before it gets here.
Okay, thank you. I just look at, Joey, some of these projects you've had out on Windmill Point particularly, I mean, we're talking acres of benefited and treated properties. I think we could do a much more better job of trying to capture the environmental benefits. Thank you.
And Bruce, if I may interrupt again, on that project for Rakel, again, the day I went down there to take pictures, I apologize, excuse me. The day I went down there to take pictures, the water was up over the bulkhead and into the fill area behind. And if that bulkhead weren't there, then yes, that's a vegetated jurisdictional wetland. The bulkhead breaks contiguity, what have you. But those are the kinds of places where you can create wetlands. In that case, filling back in a portion of that man-made canal, not state bottom, it's not a public resource, it's Mr. Rakel's property, he could create wetlands. Now, whether he could create wetlands to the point that he makes it into a bank and sells credits to other people, but those are the kind of places where, especially if you guys adopt an in lieu fee, that the county can work with other property owners and say, tell you what, you let us do a little living shoreline down here and we'll build some square feet of living shoreline to offset some of the impacts. But it's tricky.
Is that it? Any other comments? It's not on the agenda, but some of the board members were wondering if, what the status is of the last meeting where we had a couple of violations. Could you
Okay, yeah,
talk just a minute about that?
the wetlands violation for Flamia, that has to go to county attorney. There's been some other business to take care of, and the county attorney was out for a while. My personal goal is to get that to him in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
What he'll do then is pursue action in the circuit court. Of course, it's kind of a start over because what he'll first do is notify them that we tried to have some hearings and get this person to cooperate. They did not. And so here's your last chance to remove the offending gravel and the riprap he put down without a permit. See where that goes, and if that doesn't work, then that does go on to circuit court. So that process has not started yet. The other violation you heard, we tabled that, you guys tabled that to give the marina manager time to get up with me on a revised drawing. That has not happened. So I think what we will do is probably schedule it for your March meeting to kind of pick up where we left off and see what they want to do.
Send him out a notification and we'll go through that process again.
Yeah, they need to revise that drawing, make it a little better.
So they've
and
not,
it's an after
they
the
haven't
fact.
done anything?
No. And really, I think as you guys are well aware, the person who was here speaking was not necessarily, in my opinion, legally
The owner.
the owner and probably legally able to speak for.
Or even the agent?
Yeah. Yeah, so we need to get that clarified as well. Somebody with the authority to speak for the property needs to be here and able to agree to either some kind of in lieu penalty or after the fact fees or whatever. It's a minimum of an after the fact permit fee, so it's $600.
Yeah, I would like to see owner/owners here rather than a representative, but.
Correct. And as you know, the property was very far behind in taxes. So that was a concern of mine that we end up pursuing legal action when the property owner may change, because as you know, our tax cycle just flipped and all these properties just went up for sale. That property owner apparently did square up with the county, so that's now in good, quote unquote, in good standing.
Okay.
I guess in that process of another hearing, Brian, adjacent landowners would be notified so they could again speak at next month?
Yeah, that would be a proper thing to do, yes, sir, yep.
One of our members, our reserves, I'll say, has come up with a quality idea.
That's good. I call it a revisiting proposal.
Uh-huh.
And basically what
I'm sorry, can you come to so that we can go on the record, come to the podium?
I forget all my notes. Basically, I'm proposing, or this revisiting proposal involves the particular applications that we've approved sometime in the past that have a living shoreline element to them. Maybe they're all living shoreline. Right now, we approve something for a living shoreline. We have no follow-up that says, did it work or not work? And what I would propose is to develop an inventory of those applications that we have approved in the past that have this living shoreline component to them. And then periodically, we go out on Tuesday when we're looking at our normal set of applications, but we maybe add in one or two of these previous applications that we've approved to see whether or not what was suggested or what was at least approved actually took place, one, and two, what effect it had. Did it develop a living shoreline that is what we're trying to aim for? Right now, if somebody came in and asked us, well, what have you accomplished? We don't know.
Yeah.
Right now, we don't. All of the applications, that process has gone on, and unless somebody goes by and happens to see something, oh yeah, we were there 2 years ago and that looks pretty good. That's about the only thing that we have available. So I would like to make it a kind of a formal process that the Wetland Board gets involved in and actually carries out on a periodic basis. I'm willing to sit down with Brian if he's got, do you have all the applications that we've approved in the last 2 years?
Yeah,
Maybe
and
to
I
look
even-
through.
I even have one project, the first one that jumps out at me is the folks who, we did this as a letter. It didn't even have to come to you guys, but it's a group one project. The homeowners told me this was back actually a year ago this time. They said they would love for you to come out and look. They're down in Mary Point. So that's the first one I would like to show you guys. That was an oyster shell bag project.
Right.
And that just shows you what can be done. This was a project that would have easily gotten a riprap permit to begin with, but it was all done with oyster shell bags and sand fill. And the two homeowners who are in their late 70s, they did it themselves. And for not a whole lot of money, and it looks like a completely different place.
Well,
even
see, but
now,
I'm
so-
proposing something that would,
Yeah.
it's not somebody coming down and then tell us, come down and see what we've done, that we actually make that part of our process,
Okay,
that
we
we
can do
go
that.
to the next step, that when we've approved a living shoreline application, that at some point, maybe we go back and look to see,
Mm-hmm.
we give them enough time to actually implement whatever they're planning to implement, and maybe
Okay.
something takes hold of itself, but then we get a chance to go in and look and see whether or not this has actually worked.
Okay, I think that's a great idea. I think we can do that, and I think that would help with Hannah and with Lance Frank and a few of us who are newer to also see some of those other projects once they've been done.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I
and we
mean,
could look at some of the Group 2 projects as well, some of the bigger, more robust living shorelines projects. Than,
well, I'm prepared to sit down with either Brian or Hannah, and go through the applications that we've approved in the past, try to identify those that have the living shoreline component, and put together an inventory, and then on a periodic basis, as part of our, as I say, Tuesday review, we actually maybe go and look at one of these to see whether or not it's, and I see it as an educational thing also, because right now, I don't know what works and doesn't work, neither, unless we have all these beautiful pictures in some of these books
Right.
that show, hey, here they did this living shoreline. Oh, boy, that really looks good. But I don't know what action they actually took, and whether or not some of the things that we, in fact, are already approving actually are successful.
Right. This is not enforcement. This is merely to gain.
No, this is educational, I think.
Right.
I would call it educational.
Right.
So that's proposal.
all right,
And so-
I'll schedule some for our March visit.
On the agenda.
You want to jump ahead that fast? Okay,
Yeah, why not do it now?
all right.
Start
Okay.
right away.
I-
At least
as I
one
said-
or two sites because I think you have 2 or 3 projects for March, no more than that, so we'll,
And
we'll-
it would not take up a lot of time if you're going to do it on Tuesdays prior to the meeting on Thursday to take one trip.
Yeah.
And look at that particular project and gain whatever information
Yeah.
for living shoreline. That's a
Okay.
good idea.
Mr. Chairman, I think I totally agree with Hap's proposal here. I want to make sure that when we do this, though, we don't have Brian involved because of the weather, because the only time he takes us out is when it's snowing and raining and blowing 40 miles an hour, so
And it can snow in March.
thankfully Hannah can take control of this process. I would say, the question, Brian, if it's a strictly 100% a group 1, 2, it's not coming to the board.
No, the
So
chairman,
it's not gonna be an it's gonna
That's
be,
correct.
it's gonna be stuff that we don't even know about.
right, that's part of why, further to the point that you should see it. You wouldn't even see those sites normally. And I think, it's gonna help you be, truth checkers when people, and we talked about that on a couple of these sites with especially some of you guys who have done construction and stuff. Is this job even doable the way this person's proposing? And now we're being charged with the ability or the requirement to look at a site when somebody's saying, oh, I can't do a living shoreline project here. At some point in the process, and that is you guys, somebody has to stand up and say no, or disagree, and deny a project. As I found out painfully this week, it's very difficult to tell somebody no. Sometimes they react very violently. And if you're in the way, you're gonna catch the brunt of it. But those things are necessary to carry out these laws. Without somebody standing up and saying no or yes and taking the heat for that, these laws are meaningless, and really, without sounding overly dramatic, society falls apart. So yeah, the ability for you guys to see these sites and see what has worked, and in some cases quite simply worked, is going to help you when somebody says, the living shoreline's just not going to work here. You can say, well, gosh, I've seen a lot of worse places than this get, quite simply fixed with just sand and plants. So yeah, I think that's a good thing. We'll start doing that.
I think too, the other point that you made, Hap, is that, the best way for a landowner to sell a landowner on a practice is go talk to another landowner.
Mhm.
Don't come talk to us or bro. If you got a neighbor where it worked, they'll sell the practice.
Yeah, I remember in a training class, it was a wetland delineation class many years ago, the PhD guy teaching the class said, because it was mostly county staff who were in this class, and he said, don't go out there and talk to citizens and tell them about habitat and this and that, because they don't care. And I was really taken aback by that, but I found that is true. When you, like with the Shivo project, when you say, hey, look, there are terrapins that utilize the bay for nesting, and they have to be able to crawl up into that sandy area and lay their eggs in that dune area. And if you put a riprap wall there, those terrapins have nowhere to go. They don't care. That's not going to convince anybody. But showing them that they can save money protecting their shoreline, it'll work and it looks good. That's where this book, and that's what Hannah and I have been talking about a lot, the history of this book. This goes back to 1973, and it's largely unchanged until now. And so now these big changes are coming on. It's going to take a long time to get us from where this started from to now, to go from where we're going to where we need to be. So anyway.
Well, with this idea, that's a start, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think the more that we're educated, I would feel much more comfortable telling somebody who's coming on in here with a proposal that doesn't make sense, given that, it doesn't address living shoreline when it could.
Right.
And we as a board can sit there and say, wait, we've got X number of examples that where you do this type of stuff and it'll make your shoreline much better than what you're proposing to do. And we have a leg to stand on in trying to make those recommendations, and even, turning people down, given the fact that there are much better ways to go about working with their shoreline.
Okay, very good. Thank you a lot, Hap. Appreciate it. Does the board have any other comments about any other items?
Well, I just had the one on there about that draft news release I gave everybody. Is there any objection to doing something like the bragging? Anything from the county, Brian, from that standpoint?
No, I think that's fine. Yeah.
I mean, the rap record's always looking for good things to put in the paper, and I would volunteer to finalize that. If you'll give me your, any of your comments by the end of the week,
Okay,
or the first of next week, let's say.
okay.
And then I can hand carry that down to the rap record, and that was just the first cut. There's any, I had some language in there that I kind of didn't like about funding, because we don't know that sometimes about cost sharing with other entities or nonprofits paying for this, but maybe I take that sentence out about, I want people, trying to get the point across that this is local people paying for this stuff. You know, it's not the Corps of Engineers, it's not the state of Virginia, it is people, taxpayers. That was the point I was trying to get across, and I couldn't find a good word for that, so I just thought we could, at least, report on some of the good things that are happening here, as a result of activities.
Okay.
That's it.
Any other questions? As the gentleman came in late, would you like to speak to one of the issues here?
Well,
Could you come forward and state your name for the record?
my name is Bill Emery, and I just want to volunteer if you guys want a property owner who's got a living shoreline and want to visit it. You're welcome to come to my place. I think it's a great idea. It's free, and the homeowners talk to other homeowners, really helps them out. I want to find out how to live those oyster bags that old couple did. That sounded great. But anyway, thank you so much for your work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate those comments. Any other business?
Nope.
Well,
No
this
indeed.
this meeting is adjourned at 11:21. Huh?
Well done.
I like it rare.
Yeah, we can go in my office, yeah.